Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this presentation about creating and maintaining scenic views in the Hudson River Valley. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. In part 2, we will look at the handbook that has been compiled to present information and guidance for property owners wanting to create, enhance, and maintain views in the Hudson River Valley. In part 1 of the presentation series, Emily Gardner of Saratoga Associates presents an introduction of our team members, those of us that worked on this project, a project overview, description of the project, goals and objectives for the project scope, and our research and findings. Today, I will go over the handbook that has been compiled to guide you through this process. Funding for this project was provided by the New York State Environmental Protection Fund and administered by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Hudson River Estuary Program in partnership with NWIPIC. The project was completed by Saratoga Associates, landscape architects, engineers, and planners in partnership with the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, Department of Landscape Architecture. I'm Robin Hoffman, faculty in the Department of Landscape Architecture, and I'll be taking you through the handbook today. So, a quick project overview before we look at the handbook. The Hudson River Valley landscape has long been recognized for its scenery, beautiful scenery, graced with the Hudson River and the hills and mountains, large forests, working farms, unique habitats, and cities along its banks. The features of the valley have drawn artists, settlers, and tourists, and continues to be a source of inspiration for local residents and visitors. This project recognizes the past activities that have influenced the Hudson Valley's landscapes while charting a path forward for developing visual improvements in a manner which conserves and benefits the ecology that makes this landscape unique and rich in diversity. The project was focused on parks and historic sites and other large properties along the Hudson River. It strived to establish best practices for view creation and maintenance while protecting and enhancing the habitat and natural areas. The project was also done to provide education and outreach through demonstration projects and the creation of a Scenic Vista creation and management handbook. So, let's take a look at the handbook. NWIPIC and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation had very clear goals in mind when they proposed the creation of a document that would provide landowners with guidance for the establishment and maintenance of scenic vistas along the Hudson River. This document was to include sound guidance for the preservation, restoration, and enhancement of the historic landscapes that grace the shores and hills of the Hudson River Valley, their viewsheds, and their ecological integrity. With this as our instructions, the Saratoga Associates ESF team set out to create a handbook that is comprehensible to layperson and professional alike, concise in its contents, and highly illustrative. And a handbook that incorporated lessons learned from demonstration projects. These demonstration projects will be covered in the 3rd session of this series, feedback from stakeholders, and comments from NWIPIC and New York State Department of Conservation personnel. This handbook explains how the principles of ecological enhancement, property maintenance, and historical values can work with the principles of scenic quality. A balance of scenic quality and ecological health can be achieved. Within the handbook, you will find information to assist you in understanding what your property has to offer, visually, historically, and ecologically. How to find and use resources that will provide you with essential information about your property, and a site inventory checklist to help keep you and your project organized and on track. As seen here in the table of contents, The handbook walks you through the process, step by step, for creating a view or a series of views, and then guidance for short-term and long-term maintenance of the view. This information presented in the handbook will provide you with a foundation for understanding the history of landscape and design in the Hudson River Valley and contemporary practices used for the protection of the ecology and environment in the valley. History, scenic beauty, and ecology working together, well balanced in the creation and enhancement of the cherished views in this magnificent valley. Throughout the handbook, you will find brightly colored boxes filled with questions to ask yourself, principles of best management practices, for your information factoids, inspiration from Andrew Jackson Downing, and things to keep in mind as you plan your project. There is also information on methods, those to avoid and those preferred, to ensure that your plans for view creation work to express the balance of history, scenic beauty, and ecology of the valley. As shown here, there is also information to guide plans for long-term maintenance. And while the handbook covers many topics and ideas for the creation and maintenance of views, you are encouraged to consult with a professional to review and refine the details of your plans. The appendix of the handbook includes links to helpful resources, for example, mapping tools and agencies that you may contact with questions or ask for assistance. As mentioned earlier, the site inventory checklist may also be found in the appendices. Here you see the steps that outline the process for planning and creating your view. And while the process is presented here in 5 linear steps, it is important to note that the steps in the process of view creation may not be strictly linear. The order of tasks will depend on the specific conditions of your property. You may find that some of the tasks are best done in tandem. So let's get started. When you first begin planning for view creation, it's important to understand your site. So you will gather information about your parcel, the zoning in your area, and both your ownership and adjacent ownership. It's also important to look at adjacent properties with respect to their vegetative cover, habitat on that property, their ownership, zoning, etc. It's also very, very important for you to establish your goals for the project. What do you want to accomplish? What type of view? Why do you want to create this view? When do you think you would like to implement your plans? Is this short-term, or are you looking long-term, something that might be phased over many years? And then how will you implement your plans? Will you do this alone? Will there be other professionals involved in the project? It's also important as you begin planning to look into local and Department of Environmental Conservation regulations. There may be plans that have to be submitted, permits that needed to be completed and filed, and also thinking about scheduling. Your site inventory, or beginning again to understand your site, begins with looking at the existing conditions of your specific property. This process is done certainly through site walks and may be facilitated through the use of aerial photographs, surveys, and archival records. You can see here a list of a number of site inventory features of your site that you'll want to consider. So how is the site used? What are the existing views and the history of the site? What are your soil conditions and your slopes? What's the vegetation cover on your site? What are the shade patterns on your site? What habitat does your site provide? And then what will you do Or how will your plans consider the management for water quality? It is important to take note that many sites with views in the Hudson Valley are located on steep slopes. So it is important to document and consider the protection of vegetative buffers along the riverbank that serve to protect water quality. There are many mapping tools available for you to use online. These can provide you with essential information. With the need to abide by local regulations and permit requirements, these tools will be valuable resources, especially to inform environmental assessment forms and requirements for the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, also known as SEQR. With these tools, you can find base maps, you can study the context of your property. There will be aerial images available in many of these mapping tools, and also looking through the New York State Ortho site, you'll be able to look at historical area photos of your property. So for example, here's a look at an aerial photograph that maybe once you locate your property. And then by clicking on the clock tool, you'll be presented with a slider. And as you move the slider through the dates presented, you'll be able to look at your property over a number of years and explore, see what changes may have occurred over that timeline. Within the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Environmental Resource Mapper, you'll be able to look at water bodies, wetlands, significant natural communities, rare plants and animals, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation or New York State parklands, and also parcel and municipal boundaries. If you use the Identify tool within this mapper, you'll be able to find more information about your property, more detailed information about your property. So for example, here, when you click on the National Wetlands Inventory, those features then appear on the map. Okay. And then you can also click and it will provide a report for you and again, tell you more about this feature. All of this information in this mapper, you can find much more information at the DEC website. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Hudson Valley Natural Resource Mapper can provide you with detailed information about Hudson River habitat, wetland types, stream and flood hazard areas, forest cover information, biodiversity, scenery and recreation, boundary and reference layers, and by clicking on a shaded area will take you to more information. So here's an example. The boundaries of a property or a focus area are shown here with the blue outline. And then by going into more detail, you can look, for example, at the biodiversity layer shown here. And by clicking on the box for known important areas for rare plants, the mapper provides you with the extent of those areas in your project area. Okay. The New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation has a cultural resource mapper. This will provide you with information about properties that may be on the National Register and also information about archaeology in the area. Another very valuable mapping tool is the NRCS Web Soil Survey. This will provide you with information about general soil types and slopes in your project area. By clicking on an area of interest, it begins to show your property boundaries and then the soil types that are on that property. You can also click on the soil types and it will pop up with a map unit description telling you more about the soils on your property and what their suitabilities are. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Environmental Assessment Form Mapper is very helpful when a seeker review is necessary. This mapping tool also provides you with parcel ID and boundaries, and then can create a report for you that will be helpful, again, in the creation of a seeker submission. The next step in your planning process, once you've completed your inventory, is to establish goals. So your goals might consider the location of your view, specific to your property, the view position and the type of view that you want to create. Will you be establishing a new view? Will you be maintaining an existing view, or will you be restoring a historic view? You'll also want to consider access to your property and access to the view, and then the context of the view, and perhaps the need for screening. When we speak about view types, surely every view will be unique to its surroundings. However, when we describe 4 view types that we can consider in the composition and extent of the view. Here we see keyhole, filtered, vista, and panoramic. A keyhole view is a relatively small glimpse through landscape features into the distance. A keyhole view might be considered if there is a feature in the landscape that you want to focus the eye towards, or if a view into the distance is desirable, but you don't want to open up a large view because it would mean you would also see undesirable objects, for example, utilities or buildings. A filtered view, think of this view as if you were looking through lacy curtains. You can see the scenery in the distance, but it is partly obstructed by landscape features, in this example by some tree branches. This view is to be considered if maintaining privacy is important to you, while you can still appreciate the surrounding landscape. A vista view may also focus the viewer's attention to a specific feature in the landscape. However, in this case, the view is wider and unobstructed for the primary sight line. And as you can see in the top right photo, the vista view is purposely composed. Here we see the distant view framed by landscape features, in this case, large trees. The panoramic view is extensive and unbroken. It provides the widest views to the viewer's surroundings. Coupled with the type of view you plan for, another important consideration in planning for views is the viewer's location relative to the topography of the landscape. If the viewer is at a low elevation looking up towards the view of interest, we refer to this as viewer inferior or viewer below. If the viewer is close to the same elevation as the landscape being viewed, we say the view is viewer normal or viewer level. And if the viewer is high in elevation or at a prospect point, we refer to this view as viewer superior or view above. Often the position of the viewer will factor into your plans in 2 directions: the viewer looking out into the landscape and the viewer looking back at the area of interest, the viewpoint. We can see this illustrated in the photos at the bottom of the slide. The woman in the kayak may be able to see the open field above the river, but not the people enjoying their picnic. And the picnickers, because of the trees left along the riverbank, will not be able to see the kayaker. Once you've decided your goals and the type of view you want to create, you can begin your planning. These are some images taken from planning the view creation at the Blythewood Historic Property. And so they began by creating a base map. They identified the cone or the corridor of view that they wanted to create. So while there are 2 existing vistas on the property, their plans here were to restore the historic vista from the property to the river. In their plans, they considered the historical content and the assets of the property, the ecological sensitivity, specifically in the area where the view is to be created, the environmental sensitivity in that area, zoning and permitting constraints, the accessibility to the property, and also accessibility to this view area, the project financial feasibility, and then what would be needed for long-term maintenance of this newly restored view. The handbook provides text and illustrations that explain the best practices for use for removals, while pruning, also referred to as selective limb removal, may be enough to create the view that you want, say a keyhole view, or will you have to take complete trees down if you want to create, for example, a vista or panoramic view. The best practices also speak to the treatment of the edges of the view area. For example, how to leave feathered edges through the gradual thinning of vegetation across the view area. The feathered edges will likely have a more natural appearance than straight edges and provide habitat opportunities. And while the handbook is comprehensive, it is advisable to enlist the help of a professional. They can assist you with the design and composition of your desirable view and guide you through scheduling your project implementation, for example, permit application submissions and reviews, planning the timing of vegetation removal to minimize erosion potential, and how your project might be phased in consideration to habitat protection and financing. In the world of vegetation management, the saying goes, everything that drops is valuable. Down material has habitat value. As it decomposes, it replenishes soil nutrients, and it can be a very cost-efficient tool in the stabilization of exposed soils and the protection of new plantings. If your project calls for the addition of new plantings, also known as revegetation, it is advisable to choose plantings that blend with the vegetation remaining on your property, and also vegetation that is self-sustaining, native, and will not obscure the view to your newly created view. Revegetation has numerous benefits as it can decrease the negative visual impacts that result from site management activities. New vegetation can, once it is established, can minimize the growth of weeds. It can provide erosion control, screen views to existing structures, and outcompete invasive non-native plants. Keep in mind that you may need to protect new plantings from deer browsing with fencing, tree tubes, or slash walls. That's another great use of all that down material. So, in summary, the handbook will provide you with principles of ecological enhancement, maintenance, and historic values, and as they all work together in the enhancement of scenic quality. The handbook will also help you with the creation and maintenance of views that recognize the historic context of the Hudson River Valley and its scenic landscape. Within the handbook, you'll find best management practices that will guide the implementation of scenic improvements on your project, for your projects. Thank you very much for joining me today in this overview of the handbook that's been compiled for creating and maintaining Hudson River views. You can find the handbook at the link provided here. And if you have any questions, you're encouraged to contact the Hudson River Estuary Program. Here's their email address and their website. Take care. And again, thank you.